What would you do if the lives of your wife and son depended on money you didn't have? How far would you go when every door of help is slammed in your face? For one modest banker, desperation led him down a path of betrayal, secrets, and crime. But what started as a father's sacrifice turned into one of the most shocking bank conspiracies ever exposed. Before we dive into this story, kindly subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are watching from in the comment section. Now let's begin. The courtroom was silent, except for the echo of the judge's gavel. Cameras weren't allowed, but every seat was filled. Journalists, law students, curious citizens, they all came to witness the trial of the man who once counted other people's money for a living, but was now accused of handing it straight into the hands of criminals. The banker, pale and trembling, adjusted his glasses as the prosecutor's voice cut through the air. "Mr. Daniels, let's get this straight. You were a banker. A man trusted to guard the vault, trusted to guard people's life savings. Yet you conspired with armed robbers to betray that trust. Why?" The man's lips trembled, but his words were firm. "Because I had no choice. My wife, my son, they needed me alive more than they needed me honest." A ripple of shock passed through the courtroom. Some people looked disgusted, others sympathetic. Everyone wanted to know how a man who looked so ordinary could be accused of something so extraordinary. Before the trial, Daniels was described as modest, quiet, almost invisible at work. But behind his calm demeanor lay a storm. His family had been shattered by a freak accident, a crash that left his wife and only son both in desperate need of bone marrow transplants. The surgeries were their only chance at survival. But the cost? Over $300,000. Money Daniels didn't have. Insurance wouldn't cover it, loans were denied, charities turned him away. Every plea for help ended in rejection. Every hospital bill was another nail in his coffin. "You mean to tell us, Mr. Daniels, that instead of seeking legal help, you chose to sell out the very institution that fed your family?" asked the prosecutor. "I sought help. From hospitals. From charities. From God. But no one came. Then, they came." "They? Who are they?" asked the prosecutor. Daniels hesitated. The courtroom leaned in. His silence was louder than any confession. A group of men approached Daniels outside his bank one evening. They already knew about his situation. They knew about his wife's condition. His son's weakening body. And they knew Daniels was drowning in despair. They offered him salvation, but at a price. All he had to do was open his mouth. Give them the bank's layout. The security schedules. The shifts. The blind spots. He didn't have to hold a gun. He didn't even have to step inside. Just whisper the secrets only a banker would know, and walk away with enough money to save his family. And so, Daniels agreed. "I told myself it was a victimless crime. The bank had insurance. The money would be replaced. My family couldn't be replaced. But I didn't know. I didn't know it would end like this." For weeks, Daniels lived a double life. By day, he was the obedient employee who filed papers, counted cash, and nodded at supervisors. By night, he scribbled maps on napkins, whispered into burner phones, and carried the weight of a deal with the devil. Each time he looked at his son's pale face in the hospital bed, he reminded himself why he was doing it. The prosecutor paced the room, circling Daniels like a predator. "So, you became the robber's inside man. But Mr. Daniels, the robbery didn't go as planned, did it?" Daniels looked down, his silence heavier than words. "The robbers stormed the bank on a rainy Friday morning. They were masked, armed, and precise. Everything matched the blueprint Daniels had given them. For a moment, it seemed like a clean job. No alarms, no resistance. But then, something unexpected happened. One of the guards, who was never supposed to be there, arrived early. He resisted. Shots were fired. Blood was spilled. What was meant to be a silent theft turned into chaos. The heist stretched from minutes into hours. Customers screamed. Employees hid. The police were alerted. And Daniels, watching the news from his car, just blocks away, realized the monster he had unleashed was no longer under his control. And it was at that moment, Mr. Daniels, when your victimless crime claimed its first victim. Wasn't it? The banker's eyes filled with tears. He whispered, almost choking on the words. Yes. And it wouldn't be the last. The courtroom gasped. Because what no one in that room knew yet, what would only come out in the second half of this case, was that the robbery spiraled far beyond money. Double crosses. Betrayals. And a truth that would prove Mr. Daniels wasn't just a desperate father, but something far darker. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Daniels had just admitted that his so-called victimless crime had claimed its first victim. Gasps echoed around the chamber. The judge's gavel hammered the desk to quiet the uproar, but the tension was unshakable. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Mr. Daniels, you told yourself no one would get hurt. Yet a guard bled to death on the floor of your bank because of your betrayal. And if that was the only tragedy, perhaps you might still argue desperation. But we know it didn't end there, did it? Daniel's voice cracked. No, it didn't. The robbery had gone wrong from the very start. What Daniels didn't realize was that the men he trusted weren't just thieves, they were predators. They weren't satisfied with cash alone. Once the blood was spilled, something inside them snapped. They began rounding up hostages. Customers, tellers, even a mother and child. Their plan shifted from a silent job to a violent standoff. Daniels, watching from a distance, froze as his phone buzzed. A masked robber's voice pierced through the static. This wasn't part of the plan, Daniels. You didn't tell us about the guard. You didn't tell us about the cameras. Now you're going to help us get out of this mess, or your family's next. Daniel's world collapsed. He hadn't just sold out the bank, he had chained himself to killers. So, you weren't just their inside man. You became their puppet, asked the prosecutor. They had my family's names. Their faces. Their hospital. If I didn't obey, I wasn't just losing money, I was losing them. And yet, obeying only dug the grave deeper, didn't it? Daniels looked away, tears streaking down his cheeks. As the hours dragged on, the robbers turned greedy. They demanded Daniels come to the scene, disguised as a negotiator, to feed them updates about police movements. But when Daniels arrived, the leader of the crew whispered in his ear. You think we'll share that money with you? You think we care about your wife or son? You're just another pawn, Daniels. After this, we cut all ties, permanently. Daniels realized too late that he wasn't their partner. He was their disposable scapegoat. And then, the ultimate betrayal. Among the masked men was someone he never expected to see. A familiar voice. A coworker. Another banker he'd once called a friend. He was one of us. He worked with me. He was supposed to be loyal. But he was with them, the entire time. Daniel shouted. The courtroom erupted. Whispers, gasps, and disbelief spread like wildfire. The siege ended violently. SWAT stormed the building after negotiations failed. Gunfire echoed. In the chaos, 2 robbers were killed. The so-called friend escaped into the crowd, disappearing into the city. Daniels was left holding the bag, literally. He was found in the parking lot with a duffel full of stolen money, his fingerprints on every blueprint, and his phone loaded with calls to the crew. The evidence was undeniable. Mr. Daniels, you claim you were forced. You claim you were desperate. But the fact remains, you planned this. You enabled this. And in the end, you profited from this. Profit? Do you call watching people die profit? Do you call being abandoned by killers profit? I never saw a cent. All I saw was blood. But then, another revelation struck the courtroom like lightning. Investigators uncovered hospital records. Daniel's wife and son. They had been transferred weeks earlier, their surgeries already paid for in full. Anonymous donors had covered the costs. The jury looked stunned. The prosecutor smirked. So tell us, Mr. Daniels, if your family was no longer in danger, why did you go through with the crime? Daniels broke down. Because by then, it was too late. I was already in too deep. They threatened to expose me. To ruin me. Even if my family was safe, I wasn't. I was trapped. The jury saw the truth, not of an innocent man forced into crime, but of a desperate father who let his desperation blind him until it consumed him. The judge's words were final. Mr. Daniels, desperation does not absolve betrayal. You were trusted with security, and instead, you became the threat. This court finds you guilty. Daniels collapsed into his chair. For him, the trial was over. But for the public, the questions lingered. Where was the missing coworker? How did the robbers know so much about Daniel's life? And most haunting of all, did Daniels truly act out of desperation, or had greed found its way into his heart long before tragedy struck? As Daniels was escorted out, a journalist shouted from the crowd. Mr. Daniels, was it worth it? He stopped. For the first time, he looked directly at the audience, his eyes hollow. No amount of money can buy back innocence. No amount of desperation can erase the blood on my hands. The guards pulled him away, and the doors slammed shut. This case reminds us of a hard truth: desperation is real, but it is never an excuse for betrayal. Daniel's story shows how one wrong choice, even made with good intentions, can unleash consequences beyond imagination. In trying to save his family, he destroyed others. Sometimes the most dangerous crimes don't start with greed or hate, they start with fear, whispered in the dark.